When you picture the British Empire, what comes to mind? You probably see red-coated soldiers, massive warships, the sheer military might that conquered a quarter of the world. But that's not the real story. The true engine behind it all wasn't steel or gunpowder. It was finance. You see, Britain's most powerful weapon wasn't a cannon. It was a revolutionary idea that turned national debt into the ultimate tool for global domination. And that brings us to the central puzzle, doesn't it? How did a small, perpetually broke island nation manage to build the largest empire in human history? The answer isn't hidden on some ancient battlefield map. It's found in the pages of a ledger book. To really get this, we have to go back in time to the late 1600s. And let's be clear, England was not a superpower, not even close. It was a kingdom weakened by civil war, constantly scrambling for cash, and lagging way behind its richer European neighbors. I mean, look at the competition. You had France, a massive economic powerhouse, and the Dutch Republic, which basically dominated global trade. And then there was England. The English government had a terrible track record. It was notorious for defaulting on its loans, which made borrowing money incredibly expensive. Its credit was, frankly, a complete disaster. And here's the bottom line. Without a steady, affordable supply of money, you can't fund a world-class navy. You can't pay for professional armies fighting thousands of miles from home. An empire just isn't possible. For England, that dream should have been totally out of reach. But then, something happened that changed the course of history. It wasn't a great military victory or a strategic alliance. It was a brilliant, almost deceptively simple piece of financial engineering. The creation of a new kind of money machine, one that could provide the endless fuel an empire needs. So in 1694, in the middle of a costly war with France, the Bank of England was created. Now, the concept might sound totally normal to us today, but back then it was revolutionary. The government basically said to private investors, lend us your money. In return, the government gave them bonds, basically IOUs, that paid interest. And these bonds were backed by the full power of the state. In one move, the government's messy, unreliable debt was transformed into a secure, valuable asset. This effectively institutionalized the national debt. Suddenly, borrowing money wasn't a sign of weakness anymore. It was a permanent, stable way to fund the nation's ambitions. This became Britain's secret weapon. It allowed the government to tap into the private wealth of its own citizens and borrow money on a scale its rivals couldn't even imagine. And with this new financial superpower, the whole game of global conflict began to change. Wars were no longer just about who had the biggest army. They became contests of financial stamina. And that was a contest Britain was now built to win. It created this incredibly powerful cycle. Just think about it. First, the government borrows money by selling these bonds. Then, it uses that cash to build ships and fund armies. Those military campaigns win new colonies and secure new trade routes. The profits and taxes from that new trade then flow back to pay the interest to the bondholders at home. And because the whole system worked so well, investors were lining up to lend more money, which just kept the cycle going. The 7 Years' War is the perfect example. Britain borrowed enormous sums of money to fight a war on multiple continents, from North America to India. Its biggest rival, France, which was on paper a much wealthier country, simply couldn't keep up. The French financial system just buckled under the pressure, pushing the country toward the very bankruptcy that would later help spark the French Revolution. And the numbers here are just staggering. To finally defeat Napoleon, Britain borrowed something in the neighborhood of £600 million. That's an almost unimaginable amount of money for the time. Britain could outlast any enemy because it had a line of credit that was deeper and more reliable than anyone else's in the world. But this system did something else too. It created a powerful class of wealthy investors whose personal fortunes were now directly tied to the success of the British military. For these people, war wasn't just about patriotism anymore. It was a fantastic business opportunity. Funding the empire meant collecting a steady, guaranteed income from interest payments. But of course, a machine this powerful and this efficient doesn't run on money alone. It runs on a devastating human cost. And that price wasn't paid by the wealthy bondholders in London. It was paid by millions of ordinary people, both in Britain and all across the new empire. Nothing shows this darker side better than the Opium Wars. You see, Britain was buying huge amounts of tea from China, but China didn't want to buy much in return, creating a big trade deficit. So British merchants came up with a solution. They started flooding China with opium, grown in British-controlled India. When the Chinese government tried to stop this illegal drug trade, Britain declared war, using its navy to force the market open, all to make sure the money kept flowing back to London. When you actually look at the ledger of this empire, the trade-offs are just brutal. At home in Britain, a financial elite got incredibly rich, but ordinary people paid for the debt through heavy taxes on everyday things like sugar. In China, a nation's sovereignty was destroyed just to fix a trade imbalance. And in India, vast resources were extracted to service the system, sometimes leading to horrific famines as food was exported for profit instead of being used to feed the population. It really drives home a crucial point. The logic of this empire was often just cold, hard finance. The need to pay back those creditors in London often mattered more than the lives and well-being of the millions of people under British rule. This empire was run by accountants just as much as it was by generals. Now, it's easy to dismiss all of this as ancient history. But here's the thing. The financial blueprint that the British Empire created never really went away. It just evolved. It expanded. And eventually, it became the basic operating system for the global economy we all live in today. I mean, just think about how normal all of this sounds now. The idea that countries will always have a national debt, that's a given. Funding conflicts with credit instead of raising taxes, standard procedure. Global bond markets having the power to shape a government's policy, that happens every day. This is the code the empire left behind for us. Ultimately, the story of Britain's rise tells us something fundamental about how power really works. It turns out that true long-term dominance doesn't come from just controlling territory. It comes from controlling the system of credit itself. The ultimate power belongs to whoever gets to write the financial rules of the game. And all of this leads to one final pressing question for us today. We all live and work inside this global system, a direct descendant of that empire of debt. So we have to ask ourselves, where do we fit in? Are we the beneficiaries of this system, or are we, in ways we might not even realize, the ones who are still paying the interest?